Do you know about Operation Paperclip? Do you know much about it?
The Nazis, the scientists,
Yeah.
Wernher von Braun. Oh yeah, fully aware.
You know? Do most people know that story, or?
I don't think so. I don't think enough people know that story, but yeah, I don't think they do.
At the end of World War II, as Allied forces closed in on Nazi Germany, a secret U.S. operation began, one that would bring over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians to America. Known as Operation Paperclip, this effort wasn't about justice, but strategy. Today we're taking a closer look into how and why former Nazi officials were offered a new life in the United States. The end of the war and race for talent. As Nazi Germany collapsed in 1945, the Allied powers were not only focused on defeating Hitler, but also on gathering as much technical knowledge as possible. The Nazis had invested heavily in advanced weapons systems, rocketry, chemical warfare, and aerospace innovation. Much of this knowledge was concentrated among a small group of scientists and engineers, many of whom had played significant roles in the development of technologies like the V-2 rocket. The United States saw an opportunity. American military and intelligence officials were aware that the Soviet Union, once an uneasy ally, would soon become a direct geopolitical rival. Both nations were already competing for dominance in the post-war world. With Germany in ruins, the U.S. aimed to secure as many German minds as possible before the Soviets could. This effort wasn't about offering second chances, it was about preventing valuable knowledge from falling into enemy hands. What began as a scramble for scientific intelligence quickly evolved into a large-scale plan to extract and resettle individuals with Nazi ties who could help fuel American supremacy in aerospace, defense, and other scientific fields. Operation Paperclip begins.
Operation Paperclip was a secret program of the Joint Intelligent Objectives Agency that occurred between 1945 and 1959. The operation brought more than 1,600 Nazi German scientists, engineers, and technicians, most notably Wernher von Braun and his V-2 rocket researchers, plus their family members, bringing total to over 6,000 Germans to the United States for government employment in order to gain a military and scientific advantage over the Soviet Union in the post-war world.
Originally named Operation Overcast, the U.S. program was renamed Operation Paperclip as it expanded. The name referred to the paperclips attached to the files of scientists whose backgrounds would normally have made them ineligible to enter the United States. Many of these individuals were members of the Nazi Party or had worked closely with the German military during the war. Under Operation Paperclip, those ties were often downplayed or erased to ease their transition into American institutions. The program was approved by President Truman in 1945, with the condition that no active Nazi supporters would be brought over. In practice, the rule was widely ignored. The Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the predecessor to the CIA, and the U.S. Army's intelligence divisions were instrumental in altering or sanitizing records to make scientists appear more acceptable for American immigration. Among the most famous was Wernher von Braun, the engineer behind the V-2 rocket and later a key figure in NASA's Apollo program. By quietly shifting the focus from ideology to utility, U.S. officials justified their choices by citing national security and Cold War competition. The message was clear. These men had knowledge that could not be allowed to assist another superpower, especially not the Soviet Union. The ethical trade-off was swept aside in the name of progress and military advantage. From rockets to NASA. Wernher von Braun and his team, once responsible for terrorizing London with V-2 rockets, were now helping the U.S. Army develop long-range ballistic missiles. In the 1950s, their work fed directly into the Redstone missile project, laying the foundation for America's Cold War-era military might. Von Braun's team didn't stop there. By the early 60s, many former Nazi-affiliated scientists were deeply involved in the formation of NASA. Von Braun became director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center and was a key architect of the Saturn V rocket that eventually sent astronauts to the moon. Without the expertise gathered under Operation Paperclip, the U.S. may have lost the space race to the Soviet Union.
This model rocket was actually handcrafted by Dr. Wernher von Braun. As you well know, he was one of America's premier rocket scientists. But it wasn't until after World War II, when he came over with the Paperclip scientists, that he began working with our scientists developing America's space program.
This collaboration led to stunning achievements, but also caused discomfort. These scientists became celebrated figures in American scientific circles, even as their past affiliations remained quietly buried. The contributions were real, measurable, and often groundbreaking, but they came with a past that many in the US government preferred not to examine too closely. Moral ambiguity and public backlash. Even as Operation Paperclip pushed forward, there was unease behind the scenes. Some officials in the State Department and Department of Justice objected to bringing over individuals tied to war crimes, forced labor, or Nazi Party leadership. Yet these objections were frequently overruled or ignored. In many cases, files were altered or classified to prevent scrutiny. As time went on and some of the scientists became more publicly visible, journalists and Holocaust survivors began to ask questions. How had these men entered the country? What role had they played in the Nazi regime? And why were they now working for the US government? The answers often involved half-truths, omissions, or vague explanations about their pasts being, quote, reviewed and found acceptable in the context of Cold War urgency. For many Americans, especially Jewish communities and veterans who had fought against Nazi forces, the revelations were hard to accept. Public trust was shaken when it became clear that the government had not only recruited these individuals, but actively shielded them from scrutiny. Still, the broader political and scientific establishments remained largely supportive, citing the Cold War and technological gains as justification. The Soviet threat and Cold War priorities. The driving force behind Operation Paperclip was fear, not of the past, but of the future. As relations between the US and Soviet Union deteriorated, the Cold War shifted the American government's focus toward technological dominance. Soviet advances in atomic weapons and long-range missiles made it clear that future wars would be fought not only on battlefields, but in laboratories in space. Every scientific breakthrough was now a matter of national security. The Soviet Union had its own version of Operation Paperclip, scooping up German scientists and facilities in the eastern zones they occupied. This created an intense competition for technological superiority. US officials believed that if they didn't act quickly, their former enemies would soon become Soviet assets. In that context, moral concerns gave way to urgency. The goal was to beat the Soviets in every possible arena: nuclear weapons, missile systems, aerospace technology, and even medicine. Operation Paperclip wasn't just about rockets and space. It touched nearly every branch of science with military relevance. Chemists, physicists, aeronautical engineers, and doctors were all brought in under the same rationale. If their expertise could help America stay ahead, it was worth the political and ethical risk. Medical experiments and dark legacies. Not every scientist brought to the US was famous or celebrated. Some carried far darker reputations. Among them were doctors who had participated in inhumane medical experiments in Nazi concentration camps. Though the US officially banned war criminals from entry, several of these figures found ways into the country with altered records or government assistance. Their pasts were whitewashed in the name of advancing American medical research. One example was Dr. Hubertus Strughold, a former Nazi physician who became known in the US as the father of space medicine. He worked with the US Air Force on projects related to human survival in space flight. His name was even used for decades in an aerospace medicine award, until researchers exposed his connection to unethical experiments conducted on prisoners during the war. These revelations, which surfaced more prominently in the 1980s and 90s, forced the US government and academic institutions to re-examine their role in legitimizing former Nazis. The narrative of scientific progress became entangled with a legacy of abuse, complicity, and ethical compromise. Operation Paperclip wasn't just a footnote in Cold War history, it had helped shape America's scientific institutions in ways that still provoke debate. Now it's time to hear from you. What was the most surprising part of this story? Let us know in the comments section below.